This week in our Bible reading plan, we're going to complete the book of Proverbs and read all of Ecclesiastes. The Hebrew title for Ecclesiastes is Kohelet, and it means the teacher or the convener, one who brings people together to study. The author is typically considered to be Solomon, the wisest person who ever lived. Many people find Ecclesiastes a difficult book to understand, and maybe you feel the same way. However, there are some key concepts in this book that we can apply to our lives, and I want us to look at one of those today. Have you ever read the book of Ecclesiastes in one go, just start reading at the beginning right through to the end? It's 12 chapters, takes most people about 30 minutes, and I encourage you to give it a try this week in your Bible reading plan. I find that reading straight through a book of the Bible can help us to recognize some of the recurring themes that the author is trying to get across. When I did it again this week with Ecclesiastes, the theme that stood out to me this time was the tongue and the futility of many words. That's why I chose to come here to the Mount of Evil Counsel overlooking Jerusalem, because the spoken word is powerful and we need to be really careful with our words. Let's see what the teacher of Ecclesiastes has to say about it. Ecclesiastes chapter 5 verses 1 through 7 is a succinct example of Solomon's wisdom about words and the power of the tongue. I'd summarize it this way: fear God and be careful of too many words. Let's look at a few highlights from this section. Verse 2 says, "Do not be rash with your mouth, but let your words be few." And verse 3 says, "A fool's voice is known by his many words." And then in verse 7, Solomon says, "For in the multitude of dreams and many words, there's also vanity." It's summed up at the end with, "But fear God." So there you have it. Fear God and let your words be few, something that we can all improve on this week. And then in chapter 6 and verse 11, he goes on to say, "The more words, the more vanity. And what is the advantage to a man?" In chapter 10, verses 12 and 14, the teacher picks up this theme of the tongue once again. And he says that the words of a wise man's mouth are gracious. But in verse 14, he says, "A fool multiplies words." The teacher's wisdom in Ecclesiastes about the tongue reminds me of what James wrote in his book in chapter 1 and verse 26. He said, "If anyone among you considers himself to be religious, but does not bridle his own tongue, but deceives his own heart, his religion is useless." In chapter 3, James goes on with a strong message about the tongue and its dangers. He says that it's like a fire, full of iniquity, impossible to tame, and full of deadly poison. This week, as you read Ecclesiastes, let it remind you to be careful with your words. Make sure that your words are life-giving and full of grace.